fellow citizens of all nations. Part 2 of the Republic by Plato. Book 6. Do not great crimes and the spirit of pure evil spring of a fullness of nature ruined by education rather than from any inferiority, whereas weak natures are scarcely capable of any very great good or very great evil. This observation is very true, because whereas weak natures are scarcely capable of very great good or very great evil, hard is the good. Harsh feeling which the many entertain toward philosophy originates in the pretenders, who rush in uninvited and are always abusing them, and finding fault with them, who make persons instead of things the theme of their conversation. And nothing can be more unbecoming in philosophers than this. For he whose mind is fixed upon true being has surely no time to look down upon the affairs of earth, or to be filled with malice and envy, contending against men. His eye is ever directed toward things fixed and immutable, which he sees neither injuring nor injured by one another, but all in order moving according to reason. This he imitates, and those he will as far as he can conform himself. Perfect guardians must be philosophers, and do not suppose that there will be many of them. Let there be 4 faculties in the soul reasoning. Let there be 4 faculties in the soul. The first one, the reason, answering to highest, understanding to the second, faith or conviction to the third, and perception of shadows to the last. And let there be a scale of them, and let us suppose that the several faculties have clearness in the same degree that their objects have truth. Book 7. To them, the trust would be literally nothing but the shadow of the images. And this is one of the very well known examples of the Plato gives here a very inspiring thought which inspired many forms of thinking and incredible movies and etc. The cave example. And generally, just think about this thing, the cave example generally. It's like very, very interesting and very, very interesting thought to have, and just to consider things from that perspective. Like you have to question, you just cannot help but question so many things in your life generally, and generally to have like truly different perspective to our life. And here he refers to that, for example, once the man, for example, is free from that cave, how will he start to perceive the world? At first, he will see the shadow best. Next, the reflection of men and other objects in the water, and then the objects themselves. Then he will gaze upon the light of the moon and stars and spangled heaven. Now, first he will be able to best perceive the shadows. And now there was this interesting thought experiment, which I'm going to read to you right now, and let's think about this a little bit more. And if they were in the habit of conferring honors among themselves on those who were quickest to observe the passing shadows, and to remark which of them went before, and which followed after, and which were together, and who were therefore best able to draw conclusion as to the future, do you think he would care for such honor and glories, or envy the possessors of them? Would he not say with Homer, better to be servant of a poor master and endure anything rather than think as they do and live after their manner? Just think about, like, truly, what kind of, if we were to look at it from this perspective and see ourselves as the people that are in this cave, and we share honors by which one of us will be best be able to perceive the shadows, etc. Like, what would be real point of that honors? Like, it would be completely meaningless. It would have no value, because it would not just have value because it would not amount to anything. It's just waste of a breath. Our arguments show that the power and capacity of learning exists in the soul already. They must be made to descend again among prisoners in the den and partake of their labors and honors, whether they are worthy having or not. Being self-taught, they cannot be expected to show any gratitude for a culture which they have never received. This refers to the philosopher. Like, being self-taught, they cannot be expected to show any gratitude for a culture which they have never received. It's also very interesting why they are hated, the philosophers. A spirit unlike that of a other state, in which men fight with one another about shadows only and are distracted in the struggle for power, which in their eye is a great good. Where the truth is that the state in which the rulers are most reluctant to govern is always the best and most quietly governed, and the state in which they are most eager the worst. Also, he talks about what type of subjects to be prioritized in ideal state. And he supposes the scientific subjects to be proposed and to be given more attention and rights generally, and some very challenging stuff as well, but these things should still be taught because it is very important. And just like he says that philosophers should also know arithmetics and etc., because it's absolutely necessary for him to know it. Why should we dispute about names when we have realities of such importance to consider? Why indeed, when any name will do which expresses the thought of the mind with clearness? Like, this is such a great question. Why should we dispute about names when we have realities of such importance to consider? Like, they have this question so important. Like, why should we bother about these disputes of name? Why does it matter? And he talks about after the importance of dialectics, and after a certain age, let's say from 30, etc., to challenge, to reason with people, and like some people may have different opinions than you do, etc., and just to reason with them. It will help you to also examine yourself as well, and to learn about yourself generally. Book 8. It's like it will be like the thing of just like you read sometimes books. You should be trying to read books of types of books you would never usually not want to read because it says opposite ideas, etc. Like, dialectics will be kind of the same thing. And now let's continue to the book 8. Where discord arose, then the two races were drawn different ways. The iron and the brass fell to acquiring money and land, and houses and gold and silver. But the gold and silver races, not wanting money but having their true riches in their own nature, inclined toward virtue, an ancient order of things. He being not originally of a bad nature, but having kept bad company, he has not been original of bad nature, but having kept bad company, is at last brought by their joint influence to a middle point, and gives up the kingdom which is within him to the middle principle of contentiousness, and passing becomes arrogant and ambitious. Mother. Also their complaints are so like themselves. It's very interesting. He examined so deeply about these things, like how in different type of ruling system, like mothers would talk to their children and what would they say to their children behind their fathers, etc. It's like these things have such an important thing, such an important consideration, the consequences as well. And it's very truly amazing how deeply he considers these things and how deeply he observes how deeply he observes general humans and human life and rules. What is honored is cultivated, and that which has no honor is neglected. State should be aspiring to honor, because what is honored is cultivated, to honor meaningful and important things. State should not be honoring some sort of things that have no whatsoever value. State should be honoring philosophers, scientists, thinkers, visionaries, inventors, etc. And people, and an important thing, the thing is that the people with noble characters. And state should not be honoring, etc. Just list is just too huge to just kind of mention every single one of them, so I'll just leave it there. Now let's continue. Incapable of resisting either pleasure or pain. I mean, many people, they cannot resist neither pleasure and neither pain. It's a very interesting thing to consider. And however they are brought and raised to this point that they are incapable of resisting either pleasure or pain. No. And even there are some people that would just perfectly resist pleasure, but couldn't resist the pain, and there are people that can resist pain, but not pleasure, and even there are people that can resist both of them. But the vast majority of people cannot really resist none of them. The people who would escape the smoke, which is the slavery of freemen, has fallen into the fire, which is the tyranny of slaves. Thus, liberty, getting out of all order and reason, passes into the harshest and bitterest form of slavery. Book 9. Basically, the main question here is which appetites are cultivated? Those which are awakened. Basically, which appetites was the question he was talking about, and the answer to that question was this: those which are awakened when the reasoning and human and ruling power is asleep. Then the wild beast within us, gorged with meat or drinks, starts up, and having shaken off sleep, goes forth to satisfy his desires. And there is no conceivable folly or crime, not expecting incest or any other unnatural union, or parricide, or the eating of the forbidden food, which at such a time, when he has parted company with all the shame and sense, a man may not be ready to commit. Every day and every night desires grow up, many and formidable, and their demands are many. Best of them are miserable, degraded, and enslaved. This refers to the state under how people are in the state under the tyrannical rule. Best of them are miserable, degraded, and enslaved in the tyrannical state. And definitely miserable, degraded, and enslaved. It's because the state makes them miserable. State makes them degraded and enslaved. Dostoevsky has this example in one of his books. I don't remember exactly which one. Most likely it was The Devils, if I remember correctly, or The Idiot. I don't remember exactly. But the point is that there was a suicide of a young man. And as it seemed from the suicide, he had somehow gathered the money of his relatives and he just spent it on a single day, bought expensive stuff, and after finished eating and drinking this expensive in the expensive hotel, after finished this pleasure, just committed suicide. Now his soul was made miserable by system and form of life. His very soul was miserable, degraded, and very miserable, very, very miserable. His soul was very miserable. And generally, this atmosphere, you can feel it while you experience, reading its works, just what type of spirit is in society and what's going on there. Best of them are miserable, degraded, and enslaved. State under tyranny. This is what happens there. And it's important to say that these people in under this tyrannical rule has soul of the slave. These people are slaves. They have the soul of the slave. Now let's move to the tyrant. He who is real tyrant, whatever men may think, is the real slave, and is obliged to practice the greatest adulation and servility, and to be the flatterer of the vilest of mankind. He has desires which he is utterly unable to satisfy, and has more wants than anyone, and is truly poor. If you know how to inspect the whole soul of him, all his life long he is beset with fear and is full of convulsions and distractions, even as the state which he resembles, and surely the resemblance holds. The consequence is that he is supremely miserable, and that he makes everybody else as miserable as himself. This is very, very deep observation of the tyrannical rule and tyrannical man's nature. Now let's continue this. Now if you examine the three classes of men and ask of them in turn which of their lives is pleasantest, each will be found praising his own and depreciating that of others. The moneymaker will contrast the vanity of honor or of learning if they bring no money with the solid advantages of gold and silver. And these three types are rich men, brave men, and wise men. And the fourth one is the philosopher. You remember how Socrates punished, how Socrates got punished, and like you cannot ask why these philosophers are hated. They're most needed and as I'm most hated. It's very, very, very pathetic. From the side of the people, obviously, not for the philosophers. Now, Book 10. You will never be able to manage either your own house or your own state until you appoint us to be your ministers of education. And this ingenious device of theirs has such an effect in making men love them that their companions all but carry them about on their shoulders. Very interesting observation, very interesting thing to have in our mind. The imitative art is an inferior who marries an inferior and has inferior offspring. So they have even more inferior offspring. The law would say that to be patient under suffering is best, and that we should not give way to impatience, as there is no knowing whether such things are good or evil, and nothing is gained by impatience. Also, because no human thing is of serious importance, and grief stands in the way of that which at the moment is most required. This should be the law. Like such a powerful spirit and thought is summarized just in this simple quote, and is mentioned like such a. This is like truly brilliant thing to have in our mind and genuinely let this wisdom think into our very, very soul, because this is just it's the sentence speaks for himself. Now, I want to mention about the Homer, and he mentions about the Homer there, and the Homerians. Let's refer to these people this way, and they spread this idea of you should pick Homer's Odyssey and Essential and read it over and 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 over, just to same approach people have toward religious literature, religious books, etc. It's just and these days, like people have this approach toward religious. It's just a waste of time, and it is just a waste of time. No book is worth just to read over and over and over and over and over and like. Don't be fanatical, and especially when he talks about generally Homer and the poetry here. And he mentions something very, very interesting. Like he talks about the Homer, like what was his achievement? Like it's a imitative kind of false arts. Like you should be aware of the poetry generally. Like what was his achievement? I mean, as far as I know, he was he had a basically he was rich in the sense that he had a very rich wife. So pretty much he had very lot of free time. You know, his son, as he mentions in the book, was the fool and laughed by everybody. And what was his achievements? What, no, like we like to say that this Homer's work has provided and educated us a lot, etc. What was his achievements? And we should, again, read it once. I read, for example, Homer's Iliad once, but there's just like this idea of reading. It's just like this type of thing is generally humans love to fantasize things, to just read it over and over and over. Just fanatical. It's just not right to become fanatical for just something. And here's the thing. At all events, we are well aware that poetry, being such as we have described, is not to be regarded seriously as attaining to the truth, and he who listens to her, fearing for the safety of the city which is within him, should be on his guard against her seductions, and make our words his law. Now think about this poetry is that you just, there is this, poetry generally has this thing, like it's just a seductive art that like lures you in, and you just read it over and over. And I've experienced this personally. You just read it over and over and over, and you think about it, and you repeat it, and you remember it. And right next day, you repeat it over and over. It is a very seductive art, and not so useful. And at the end, he starts saying a tale, very interesting tale about a man that died and returned alive, and etc. And what he sees there, and just you cannot help but think about just how many things Christianity took from the philosophy, because it clearly did, but how many things. And then that story and there's a very interesting part of the water part. There was this water, and people could choose what type of animals or creatures they could be reborn as, etc. And the main character of this story, just like some thunder appears, etc. Wakes, and some people lose their entire memory, and their souls get defiled because there's this water that they can't hold, and they like drink too much instead of what is necessary. Generally, and just think about this thing. I just cannot help but think about generally this thing. Like how many things it took. How many things Christian took from the philosophers. And I hope this conversation, in summary, was interesting for you. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And comment down below if you have anything to share. And see you soon.